Welcome back to Tipping Point. I'm your host, Riley Lewis, filling in for Kara McKinney. Mark your calendars, ladies and gents. We're witnessing some disturbing and significant history unfold today, as the widely covered and highly contentious dock workers strike that began on Monday is finally ending. Even though the strike only lasted for 3 days, it had a significant impact in the negotiation process because it affected 36 ports and created a massive backlog of anchored cargo ships. Port operations are now set to resume immediately since U.S. dock workers and port operators in the International Longshoremen's Association Union reached a tentative agreement with the United States Maritime Alliance to increase their wages by 62% over the next 6 years. That's according to two sources who spoke to Reuters about the strike, one of whom heard the announcement on the picket line. The United States Maritime Alliance proposed initially a 50% increase, but the union wanted a 77% increase, so they rejected the proposal. I certainly wouldn't say that's dealing in good faith on their part. However, what's particularly interesting about this tentative deal is the timing. There appears to be a correlation between the ending of this painful strike and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' decision to deploy National Guardsmen to ports throughout his state in order to get things under control and even resume operations until the strike concluded. He discussed the plan at a press conference in Manatee County yesterday, and just like clockwork, the union workers likely realized they could be replaced, so they came back to the negotiating table. Let's take a quick look at some of his remarks.
At my direction, the Florida National Guard and Florida State Guard will be deployed to critical ports affected to maintain order and, if possible, resume operations, which would otherwise be shut down during this interruption. Florida Department of Transportation is coordinating calls with seaport rail and trucking partners to ensure that all are prepared and positioned appropriately to limit disruptions to the supply chain and other areas should this continue. And I would say that this is something that would have significant impacts on the nation's economy anyways, but to have this happen in a way that could negatively impact people that are reeling from a Category 4 hurricane, that is just simply unacceptable. So it really is incumbent upon the Biden-Harris administration to do everything in their power to ensure that these goods are where we need to be, that people are not left hanging out in the cold waiting for these goods if they're sitting in the ocean somewhere and they're not being able to be used here in the state of Florida or in Georgia or North Carolina or where people are going to desperately need this. We need to accelerate. We have no time for delays. Biden-Harris has a responsibility to stand up for the storm victims, stand up for the people who've had their homes damaged or who've lost their homes, and make sure they have what they need to get back on their feet.
Well played, Governor DeSantis. Well played. It's quite nefarious and selfish to pull a stunt like this while Americans are still struggling with the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, especially since their employer again offered a 50% pay increase over 6 years. And apparently that offer isn't good enough for Harold Daggett, the dock workers union president, who just so happens to live in a sprawling New Jersey mansion that's over 7,000 square feet. It's a massive house on 10 acres in a township of Sparta, which lies roughly 50 miles west of New York City, and there's no logical explanation for how a union boss could afford such a vast piece of property. But while we're discussing him, I want to call attention to some of his recent comments in an interview he did before the strike ended. He was asked about many different subjects, including that strike, and he made a deeply disturbing comment about it.
These people today don't know what a strike is. Right. When my men hit the streets, from Maine to Texas, every single port will lock down. You know what's going to happen? I'll tell you. First week, be all over the news every night, boom, boom. Second week, guys who sell cars can't sell cars because the cars ain't coming in off the ships. They get laid off. Third week, malls start closing down. They can't get the goods from China. They can't sell clothes. They can't do this. Everything in the United States comes on a ship. They go out of business. Construction workers get laid off because the materials aren't coming in. The steel's not coming in. The lumber's not coming in. they lose their job. Everybody's hating the longshoremen now because now they realize how important our jobs are. Now I have the president screaming at me, I'm putting a Taft-Hartley on you. Go ahead. Taft-Hartley means I have to go back to work for 90 days. That's a cooling off period. Do you think when I go back for 90 days, those men are going to go to work on that pier? It's going to cost the companies money to pay their salaries. Well, they went from 30 moves an hour maybe to 8. They're going to be like this. Who's going to win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. And in today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea what that means. Nobody does.
Joining us now to discuss is Mark Mix, the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. Mark, thank you for being here today.
Riley, good to be on with you, and that was a tremendous intro and some real leadership around DeSantis and some amazing comments by a union official that's been granted this monopoly power, not only over the workers at the ports along the East Coast, but also potentially the power over the economy. I mean, those words are haunting to the American economy and to the American consumer, and we have to do something about that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my humble personal opinion, I think that's evil right there. Actually, I mean, bragging. We've got a Category 4 hurricane. People are really struggling economically. We have a presidential election around the corner, about a month to go until Election Day, and you're going to sit there and say that you will cripple the U.S. economy. To me, that is pure evil. That is demonic. It's really quite disgusting in a lot of ways. It's really a treason, in my opinion. But I do want to ask you, because as of right now, the strike has been suspended. So does that mean it's technically over, or could they go back to the picket line?
No, I forget. Is it a Yogi Berraism? It's not over until it's over. And this is not over. They're going to go back on and basically sit down and come back on January 15th. And Riley, to your point, I mean, not only is the economic issue and the hurricane issue important, but also the politics plays into this in a big way. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we got this, quote, unofficial cooling off period, which is kind of the implementation of Taft-Hartley without the implementation of Taft-Hartley. Union President Daggett was wrong. It's not 90 days. It's an 80-day cooling off period under the Taft-Hartley Act. But that Biden said he wouldn't do it because they didn't want to upset rank and file union members like they did with the railroad strike a year and a half ago when they came in and they imposed a contract back on the railroads and the union officials there. So this time the politics was playing into it. And so now it's not over. The only thing they settled on was that pay increase you spoke of. There's still a question about the automation. There's a question about the container royalty fees. There's a question about, whether or not workers that are non-union that are working on hybrid ports in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia are going to be able to continue to operate the way they're operating. Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina have these hybrid non-union models where non-union workers and union workers work side by side. So there's a lot left here, and I think that leverage will just reinsert itself, and they will again hold us hostage starting January 15th instead of in between now and in a presidential election.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And one of the things that I'm really wondering about is, I think so much of the situation speaks to the power and the leverage that union officials certainly have. And we've had you on the show to talk about the rifts sometimes that form between union leaders, the union reps, and the actual guys on the ground, the real workers, who I empathize with completely. I get it. The workers are looking at a huge cost of living increase. They're trying to figure out their future. They want to plan for their families. I get that. I'm not coming down on the workers. It's the union bosses here that seem to be dealing in bad faith. So I want to ask you about that. I mean, what do you make of the tactics that we've seen in terms of the negotiation process here?
Yeah, well, probably the best case study, Riley, is the UAW strike that occurred last year, that so-called floating strike or whatever they call it, moving strike, whatever Sean Fain called it. But here you had a union official who's totally on board with the electrification of the automobile industry by 2030, 2032, whatever Biden and Harris have promoted. Right. And you know that 40% of all the auto workers left in the United Auto Workers Union, they're only about half of the UAW membership now that UAW represents graduate assistants and college students across the country. They would be out of work if this plan goes into effect, if it's fully implemented. And so they fought back against union leadership. And you saw that. Many UAW members said, how dare Sean Fain stand up to this? And Sean Fain understood it well, too, because after the strike, and he said, after they endorsed President Biden and that endorsement fell to Kamala Harris now, said, the great majority of our members will not be voting for Joe Biden. Those were his words, not mine. And Riley, that shows exactly that disconnect between union officials and rank and file workers. I mean, the solidarity here at the International Longshoremen's Association may have been 100% perfect, but the idea that those families would be hurt too, no matter what happens, if they don't unload those cargoes, those containers and the cargoes at the ports. I mean, the position of this union official saying with his hand around his neck, saying, we'll strangle you or we'll cripple you, that should haunt everybody, including those rank and file workers who are represented by this union official.
Yes, and it completely undercuts the argument or the idea that you as a union rep are really representing the very best interests in any way that you can of the working people that you know are employed with United States Maritime Alliance or any other employer, right? So I think it's just completely counterproductive and really just mean-spirited. It makes me wonder, is this guy a mob guy? I mean, that was a very Tony Soprano kind of, you know, suggestion he put there, and I watched all of The Sopranos. I'm a huge fan of The Sopranos. It seems like a mob boss kind of tactic. We know we got you by the short hairs. We know we have all the leverage, and we're going to use that leverage to squeeze you and squeeze the employer, and we'll make the American people pay for it and pay for that pain and suffer through it in the meantime. It's just not good faith. So I don't know what's going to happen with the terms of final deal. 62% for a pay raise over the next 6 years. That seems extremely generous. I don't even know if that's totally deserved or not, but that's neither here nor there because right now they are inflicting pain on the American people. It is suspended, so hopefully it just is a, you know, a resolved matter at this point. But like you said earlier, it's not over until it's over. So and this broader dynamic here between union bosses and their employers is something that we're going to see in play as well in the future. So I really just don't like what's being said here. I don't like the tactics. I don't like the terms of the deal. I just want what's good for the workers, yes, but it seems like this just spiraled out of control so quickly. So as we're coming up against a break, Mark, what are some of your final thoughts about what we're seeing?
Well, certainly we want to make sure that this type of monopoly power that union officials can exercise, whether it be the ports or whether it be the railroads, we need to address that issue. That's a congressional issue about union monopoly power and something that we've been working on at Right to Work for years and years and years. And there's still work to be done there to kind of free up this power that is granted to union officials that are exempt from antitrust laws is another question. Lots of things to talk about, but hopefully this is over, as you said, Riley. It gets settled now, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Either way, we'll have you back on the show to further discuss this topic because it's not going anywhere. But in the meantime, I do appreciate it, Mark. Thank you for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Riley. Appreciate the opportunity to be on with you.